Good evening. We welcome you this evening to Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, where we strive to practice peace, service, and openness to all. I am Naomi Cranebring, one of the members of the pastoral staff here at E-Town COB. We are very glad you are here. We hope you will find this to be a comfortable and safe space this evening. A couple of announcements before we begin. Welcoming both those who are here in person as well as those who are joining us online. Thank you for being there. I will be monitoring the chat online, so feel free to leave questions or comments and have conversation in that space if you would like to do so. If you need to use restrooms, you can find them going either direction out the back of the sanctuary. To the left, we have gendered restrooms. To the right, we have gendered restrooms and an inclusive restroom as well. So you're invited to use either of those. There's also a water station out to the left. In the event, when we leave this space at the end of the evening, you can leave from the back as you came in. There are also exits out the front here, both sides, that lead to the outside. There is a nursery space available. There is no one supervising that space this evening, but the live stream of this event is streaming in there. So if anyone has a need for a space with small children, you are invited to use that, and that is to the right as you exit the sanctuary. We are glad that you are here. In what feels like a very divisive and complex environment, we hope that this will be a time of learning and connecting and communicating well with one another. Thank you for joining us this evening.
I'm going to ask you to do that again because there are a few thank yous that we need to recognize as this program begins. First off, Pastor Naomi and the entire staff, congregants from Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, they have hosted this event. They've all showed up to make this a successful event. So one more time, if you could give it up for E-Town Church of the Brethren. One more housekeeping item, and I told Naomi I always wanted to do this, and I never had a chance to do this. Would you please turn off your electronic devices? Turn them off, because the policy tonight is no photos, no videos, no recordings. It is being live streamed and on YouTube if you have a desire to see it again. The second thank you is to a group called Power Interfaith. You may have heard about them in the flyer. You saw their table out front. They are the sponsor of tonight's program, and but for Power Interfaith, we would not be here today. There are two representatives from Power Interfaith today, Reverend Kathy Coons and Pastor Jason Perkowski, and they'd like an opportunity to tell you about their organization.
Good evening, friends. On behalf of Power Interfaith, it's an honor to welcome you to this important gathering. We are grateful to be co-sponsoring tonight's conversation on democracy, faith, and power, exploring Christian nationalism across communities and continents. At Power Interfaith, our work begins with a simple but profound conviction. Faith has something to say about the issues that matter most in people's lives. Whether it's fair housing, quality education, bail reform, or immigration policy, we believe that people of faith can come together across traditions to build a more just and loving society. Now, while Christian nationalism is not the sole focus of our work, it does touch everything we care about. Because Christian nationalism is not just an abstract idea. It has become an organized movement. It shows up in school board meetings, in city council chambers, in township zoning hearings. It shows up in how our neighbors are treated and whose voices are heard. And we know that if people of faith who believe in love, justice, and inclusion do not show up, other voices will fill the void. That's why Power Interfaith organizes at the local level. We're committed to being present where decisions are being made, down to the school boards and zoning meetings, so that values of compassion, dignity, and fairness are represented. We do this because we love our neighbors and because we believe democracy works best when all of us are at the table.
And we can't emphasize that enough. It works best when all of us are at the table. That includes those who are marginalized by their race, by their gender, educational status, economics, or criminal justice experiences. We need all the voices at the table. Tonight's lecture is an opportunity to take a deeper look at Christian nationalism, to understand its reach, and to reflect together. That's probably a key word these days, eh? To reflect together on how we can, as a people of faith, respond with courage and hope. We're grateful to learn from the wisdom of Dr. Andrew Ward and Dr. Greg Carey, and to stand alongside so many others who share a vision of communities that are rooted in justice, democracy, and love. And we want this conversation to continue beyond tonight. We invite you to stop by and see us at the Power Interfaith table to get information about some of the campaigns we're running. If you want to be in contact with us, you can sign up for our email list, and we'd love to have you join us there or to ask questions. There you can connect with us, sign up for more info, pick up those informational flyers, and find out how you can get organized in response to the things you may learn tonight. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers tonight and our moderator tonight for being here to guide us in this conversation. Your presence is a sign that together we can build something stronger than fear. Together, we are here building a beloved community focused on our common good.
Our plan is to have a question and answer beginning about 8 o'clock. So those folks who are at either the beginning or the end of the row, you see those little 3x5 cards there? These are the question cards. Now would be a good time to hand them out. So if you're thinking about doing a question, we're going to ask you to write it out. And then if you would, when you're done writing it, fold it in half, pass it on down to the middle. The ushers will pick them up, and they'll bring them up to the front. And obviously, there's no guarantee that your question will be read, but we will do our best. My third thank you, and I'm going to pick up on what Pastor Jason just said, is this program would be not successful without all of you being here. We have over 250 people registered in person and over 50 people registered virtually, some as far away as Hilton Head, South Carolina. We have two distinguished speakers tonight. And if you'll put your hand up so that they know who you are, Dr. Andrew Ward, Dr. Greg Carey. Dr. Greg Carey. Oh, not yet. Dr. Ward is a professor at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. He focuses his teaching on religious nationalism, public health, and development policy. He's worked in over 40 countries and led numerous initiatives designed to increase cross-cultural understanding and resist democratic backsliding. His work has earned international recognition, and he is a frequent speaker and a media commentator. Dr. Ward is completing his book entitled Democracy, Dominion, and Demons: How Once Frigid Religious Radicals Have Seized the Reins of American Power. Dr. Greg Carey is an associate dean for the Lancaster campus and professor of New Testament for the Moravian University School of Theology. Dr. Carey has published widely on public biblical interpretation of the New Testament. His publications include Rereading Revelation, Theology, Ethics, and Resistance, Death, the End of History, and Beyond Eschatology. I didn't do very good on that. Eschatology. I did have to look it up what it meant. I'm going to let Dr. Carey tell you what it is. And using our outside voice, public biblical interpretation. Dr. Carey speaks frequently on Christian nationalism, and in talking to Greg, he speaks a lot about Christian nationalism and its threat both to democracy and to Christianity. Dr. Ward and Dr. Carey have developed a program tonight into 6 sections. They're going to take turns going back and forth for these 6 sections. Now, I always like a historical context, so here's your historical context. March 4th, 1789, the United States Constitution was ratified. But the Constitution, as you might think about it, was only the preamble, we are the people, so forth, and 7 articles. George Washington was inaugurated his first term of president on April 30th, 1789. It wasn't until December 15th, 1791, that the Bill of Rights was adopted. I'm going to read the First Amendment to you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Simple statement, powerful words written by James Madison. Simply stated, the government can't create a religion. Without further ado, Dr. Carey.
In, especially thankful to Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, and I worked with Pastor Naomi and Pastor Jason, talked to members of the board. I'm deeply grateful for your hospitality, and to Power Interfaith. I volunteer a lot with Power Interfaith and have over the years. Just want to say one other thing. What we're talking about is deeply implicated in politics. We're in a church. I'd prefer not to talk about politicians and parties in church. So let me just say that as a scholar of religion who teaches in a theological seminary, Lancaster, part of Moravian University now, for me, this is a gospel issue and a human dignity issue. And so that's what makes it appropriate to have a conversation about Christian nationalism in church. I am not here. This isn't a church service, and I'm not here to change your mind, but what I experience is that so many people have heard the term Christian nationalism, may be concerned or even preoccupied with it, but have a sense that they don't know what we're really talking about. And when I do these presentations, I do feel that that helps folks understand a little more and perhaps have some ways of moving forward. And it's been an absolute ball to talk with Andrew Ward about this stuff. So how would I define Christian nationalism? There's a technical academic way that Christian nationalism is a set of ideas, and there's a way in which it is. And the ideas are pretty simple. The most basic is Christian nationalists want the United States to be a Christian nation as they understand what that means, and govern itself according to Christian principles, their version of Christian principles. We'll talk about that. They also tend to believe, not all of them do, that the United States was founded to be a Christian nation and needs to be such because God has called the United States into a special relationship, has blessed the United States, and expects it to, like a king of Israel from our Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures, to govern according to the will of God. When sociologists try to understand the movement, they tend to rely on survey questions and survey data. And the Public Religion Research Institute, which spends a lot of time on this issue, has identified 5 statements that they want to see if people agree strongly, disagree, or disagree strongly, right? The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. U.S. law should be based on Christian values. If we move away from our Christian foundations, the idea that the country was founded as a Christian nation, we won't have a country anymore. Being Christians, an important part of being truly American. Finally, and this one is super interesting, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. Now, dominion is interesting because very, very few Christians were using that term even 15 years ago. Some were, but its use has exploded over the past 15 years. Now, let's think about dominion. Set aside that it's over all areas of society, but let's think about our civic life. Dominion ain't democracy, right? Dominion is power over. It can be exercised by a minority. And what we will find, and we find that Christian nationalists will say this openly in many settings, they use democracy as a weapon against democracy. Okay? They use democracy as a weapon against democracy. If you look at the survey data, according to PRI, about a third, a little less than a third of Americans are kind of friendly toward those 5 ideas. 2/3 are kind of unfriendly. The idea isn't super popular. So what makes Christian nationalism such a powerful force in our society? One answer is our elections are super, super, super close on a national level. So if you can motivate 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 million people with a particular religious outlook, that is an extremely powerful thing to be able to do. But another dimension of it is power in a democracy isn't just how many people think or want certain things, it's how hard they're willing to work and sacrifice for it. And Christian nationalists are highly motivated, highly organized, and extremely well-funded. So if we want to imagine what Christian nationalism really kind of looks like, I've been using this picture for a few years. It looks just like this, but let me explain, because I'm not just being snarky. This photograph has so much analytical stuff going on. The moment was June 2020. Donald Trump was president and a candidate for president. The Black Lives Matter protests were happening around the United States, happened in Lancaster, right? Happened in E-Town, if I remember correctly. And they were happening in Washington. There had been some property damage. This is St. John's Episcopal Church. You see boards up on the walls. There had been some graffiti and so forth there. Donald Trump goes to the Rose Garden of the White House, gives a brief talk, basically calling for law and order, and then uses police and other security forces to clear a path. I've talked with a police officer who was involved, rubber bullets, tear gas. Clears the path, and he goes to St. John's Church and just stands there with a Bible in front of the church for a photograph, did not speak. Christian nationalism is using the symbols and language of Christianity to justify a particular version of political authority. So the church and the Bible here are props, right? Why do I say props? Well, this isn't Donald Trump's Bible. He lived in the White House, but he didn't happen to bring a Bible, right? So they collected Bibles, put them on a table, and picked the one that would look best in a photo op. Didn't they do well? It's a good Bible-looking Bible. And the church, he had never been inside to worship. No one called the rector of the church, what Episcopalians have, or the Bishop of Washington, who interviewed the next day, said, "This is offensive. This runs counter to everything our church stands for." He was not invited, he was not welcome to use our church that way. That's what I mean by props. But by posing in that way, the Bible and the church stand behind his authority. And I've skipped the main thing. This is very white authority. Remember, the issue of the day was the Black Lives Matter protest. So when we think about Christian nationalism in this way, we could start asking questions like, if you want Christian values, which ones? For example, black Protestants in their social attitudes could not be farther apart from white evangelicals, white Catholics, or white mainline Christians. In fact, measured by religion, everybody else is closer to black Protestants than they are to white Christians. So they're Christians too, but they wouldn't share the Christian nationalist political agenda that we're seeing today. Church of the Brethren typically wouldn't. United Church of Christ typically wouldn't. United Methodist typically wouldn't. Roman Catholic bishops and their social statements, absolutely not. What happens to the rights of people, Christian or otherwise, who don't share that outlook? Or to take a particular example that seems to work in a lot of parts of the world, what about Jews? Do they have the same rights this narrow group of Christians do? Could they be elected to office? When people think about Christian nationalism, I'm going to change topics a little bit just to sort of introduce you to the world of it. It's not just one kind of Christian, but it has diverse streams. Mm-hmm. So most Americans think of someone like Franklin Graham, the old moral majority, religious right. There he is, gray suit, white shirt, boring tie. Could have said the same thing about Jerry Falwell or James Dobson or Ralph Reed, right? At any point, we recognize that kind of conservative mainstream Christianity. It is not the most relevant form of Christian nationalism today, not by far. Those churches are declining. But a movement that is rapidly growing in the U.S. and across the world is independent charismatic Christianity. Christians who believe in miracles and casting out demons and spiritual warfare, who have apostles and prophets who speak directly for God, that their words are what God says in this movement. And whenever you would see a picture of Donald Trump surrounded by preachers who have their hands extended and are praying, most of them are apostles and prophets. Paula White Cain, prominently in the white dress in the picture, is out of that movement and is the White House faith liaison. 8 days before the January 6, 2021 insurrection, 12 or 15 of these apostles and prophets were in the White House for 2 hours, and a couple said later, we were praying and strategizing, and great things are going to happen on January 6th. Mm-hmm. Talking about access to power. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, between the 2020 election and January 6th, was in several online prayer calls that involved hundreds of thousands of people over time, praying for God to overturn the election results. Another flavor you might be hearing more about, we might call Reconstructionist Reformed. These are extremely conservative churches out of the tradition that would produce Presbyterians and Reformed churches. Our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, attends a church in Tennessee that has a private school that's affiliated with the same network of private schools in which Veritas Academy belongs. The founder of that network is a pastor in Moscow, Idaho, named Doug Wilson, who placed a billboard in Ephrata a couple of years ago, and whose name is prominently displayed on the Logos Academy website. He wrote some of the textbooks with the headmaster. He believes things like women shouldn't be allowed to vote if they're married. He calls himself politically just to the right of Jeb Stuart. I'm from Alabama. I know who Jeb Stuart is. Confederate cavalry general. Wrote a book defending Southern slavery. And then when we think about our Vice President, J.D. Vance, not that long ago converted Roman Catholicism, and a stream of Roman Catholicism, Catholic integralism, that believes the government should serve the purposes of the church, specifically the moral and theological teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. The picture you don't recognize is Leonard Leo, founder of the Federalist Society. right? How many of our Supreme Court justices are Catholic? 6. 5 came through the Federalist Society. Leonard Leo has raised over $1 billion for that effort. Access to power. These groups, all, if it was just about religion, would hate each other. The charismatics would say the others don't have the Holy Spirit. The Catholics would say the others are out of communion with the true church. The Reformed would say the others are all going to hell. But politically, what holds them together is this conviction about dominion. So they're diverse movements, they have diverse theologies, but they are deeply, deeply networked, organized, and funded. And the reason we're hearing so much about them is the amount of access they have right now to the things we're seeing in our country. Andrew?
I'd like to echo what everyone has said thus far in terms of a great deal of thanks. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for those who are tuning in online. Thank you to Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren. Thank you to Power Interfaith. This, obviously, just looking around at the sheer number of people we have here tonight, is an important issue to so many of you. We've obviously touched a nerve, and there is a lot of need for us to be on the same page as we engage with everything going on. So, one of the things also that I am very grateful is that I have family that lives up here in Lancaster County, and I get to visit with some regularity. That there are the bucolic scenes of rolling hills and quaint towns and a patchwork quilt of farms. It is a far cry from my deep, muddy bayou swampland of Louisiana, and it is a far cry further from the places that I actually grew up. Owing to my father's job as a diplomat, I grew up in North Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and India. And his job was as a cultural attaché, so his purpose was to tell the story of America to other people all over the world. That story of a proud country dedicated to equality, opportunity, inclusivity, that endless cycle of goodness that we were sending out into the world. But that story just didn't seem to comport with the experiences that I had when I came back to the States over Christmas holiday and summer break. That story wasn't what the black people I met were saying about inclusivity, about opportunity, about glory. That story wasn't what the poor people and previously wealthy people who had gone bankrupt because they couldn't pay their medical expenses had to tell me. That story was certainly not what I heard when I turned on the TV and I saw these flamboyant men like Jimmy Swaggart from the great state of Louisiana and Jim Baker and Pat Robertson and these other characters. They did not seem to be telling the same story. Yes, America was a land of promise. Yes, America was a special, blessed land, but it was only blessed for certain people. It was only blessed for true Americans. And true Americans had to be the right kind of religion, too. And it couldn't just be any old religion, it had to be the right kind of Christianity. And this type of thing stuck in my craw from an early age. And we humans are storytelling creatures. We tell stories about ourselves to understand ourselves. We tell stories to other people so that they know which is the in-group and the out-group. We tell stories to find our own place in the linear cosmos of time, past, present, and future. And in troubled times, we often like to reimagine the past to explain how we got to this moment and to inspire hope and provide a roadmap into a more desirable future. So if you don't like your current circumstances and you want a different tomorrow, then the first step, according to George Orwell, Joseph Stalin, and many of the leaders of the Christian nationalist movement, is simply rewrite your past. And how many of you have heard this story? The Pilgrims were a group of religiously oppressed people who got out of England. All they wanted to do was found a new colony in Massachusetts wherein there would be freedom and justice and opportunity and inclusivity, and this is what they wanted. Religious tolerance for all. How many of you grew up with that story? Show of hands. Wow. Wow. The propaganda machine was powerful for generations, brothers and sisters. The opportunity that I now have is to dismantle that tidy little myth. The Pilgrims were indeed fleeing England, but they established a base first, many people don't know this, in Holland, where they spent over a decade living amongst not just the Dutch, but all the other traders that were there as well. They spend a decade with unprecedented levels of freedom to practice as they chose. And do you know what they thought? Yuck! No, thank you. We don't want anything to do with this. The daily interaction with these other people led to some very uncomfortable discussions with their theocratic leaders. And so when you're running around and on a daily basis, your good, clean pilgrim child now has to interact with Catholics, Lutherans, Arminians, oh my! Even Jews and Muslims were on tap. And some of the youth in the pilgrim community were getting the wrong set of ideas, so leadership said, it is time to leave, and we are going to the Hudson Valley. But they got blown off course, and they ended up in Massachusetts, and that's where they stayed. And upon arrival, what did they establish? Was it a religiously free environment for all the hippies to come and be happy together? Not on your life. Certainly on the lives of others, though. When the Quakers showed up, you know what they did? They lynched them. When the Baptists tried to live amongst them, do you know what they did? They whipped them. They stripped them naked down to their skivvies, and they whipped them from town to town through New England. Not exactly the picture of pluralism and religious tolerance at the time, now is it? Fast forward another century and some change, and we find ourselves at the outbreak of the Revolution, and the establishment not of a few colonial outposts, but of a new nation conceived in liberty. Well, the story some would like to tell you, the past that they would like to rewrite, is that a group of born-again Christians penned the Declaration of Independence while saying the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, chiseling the words, "In God we trust," on all their money. They'd like to tell you how George Washington knelt in prayer a few miles from where we are now in Valley Forge. And then what he would do is read the Bible after communion every Sunday with fellow evangelicals Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. This is a friendly crowd here. As you well know, none of that happened, not even remotely. George Washington was famous in his own time and by his own hand for his quiet, non-engagement with religious matters in public. George Washington only attended church 12 times in the last decade of his life. After the Revolution was over, he never received communion even once. On his deathbed, leeches still hanging from his flesh, he refused to see a pastor, a preacher, a priest, or a minister. Thomas Jefferson famously penned those words, "a wall of separation between church and state," and his personal Bible looks nothing like anything that we would find in this sanctuary. No, Thomas Jefferson took a razor blade to the holy text, and he cut out everything illogical, unreasonable, and indeed miraculous. No virgin birth, no loaves and fishes, no, having the lame walk, no resurrection. That's quite a thing to consider, and how we can hardly categorize him as being in the same spiritual universe as the people who invoke his name today while talking about America being founded as a Christian nation. Now, while there were many Christians here, and of many different kinds at the time of the founding, that very fact is the reason why, when they were drafting the Constitution for this new nation, they insisted on no establishment of a single state religion. They couldn't trust each other. The bloody religious wars of Europe were still fresh in people's minds, and the last thing we wanted to do was replace those horrors on our own continent. So, as such, they ensured the crucial foundational document was a godless constitution. Christian nationalists want to tell you that it was based on biblical principles inspired by the pure light of the divine. Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't inspired by such. I wasn't there. All I know is that there's certainly a name in the Constitution that is notably absent: Jesus. There's no Jesus in there. Frankly, there's no Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim, Krishna, or anybody else for that matter. What is there is extraordinary. All authority, all power to construct this new nation not being derived from any power on high, but indeed from those first three words of the preamble that you mentioned, Scott: we the people. There is no Bismillah or Baruch Atah, no Sat Sri Akal, no Om, and no in the name of God. There is a righteous government drawing its power and legitimacy from a consenting people. It was the first national establishment paperwork in the history of humanity to do so. And that is remarkable. That is precious. That is even miraculous in its own right. But it's also terribly inconvenient if you're trying to be a Christian nationalist movement, thematically and strategically, because they have a need to completely rewrite and institutionalize our history to pose a contrast to what we're experiencing presently, and to set a course for the kind of future that they want up ahead. It's not the first time we've done it. It was at the height of the Cold War that we saw that the arch enemy was the evil Soviet Empire. So if they're going to be the godless pinko communists, we need to be the righteous soldiers of God. And that's why we need to start putting God everywhere and plastering it everywhere we possibly can. Doing those things that I mentioned tongue-in-cheek a few minutes ago, like putting "In God We Trust" on our paper currency for the first time in 1956 and making it the official state motto. It wasn't beforehand. We had an unofficial motto, which was "E pluribus unum," from many comes one. It wasn't until 1954 that we added "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, which was already 75 years old at the time. So the idea then, if a Christian nationalist believes that the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation, and the reality of historical scholarship simply does not support that notion, we can now understand their intense desire to seize the reins of institutionalizing power, of public myth-making, and official storytelling, and present their own version of the past, no matter how convoluted. For they have, after all, as Kellyanne Conway once said, alternative facts. And what does this process of institutionalization look like? How do we formalize and concretize, then massively disseminate these ideas? And perhaps more importantly, how do we crush any dissenting ideas? There's Beelzebub has sent an emissary here. Critical thinking itself comes under fire. And the way to do it is to seize control over information itself. Look to the great debates that were mentioned earlier by some of my preceding speakers. Sweeping the nation right now, you find them at regional libraries, where drag queens and problematic books are being banned. Look to who is running for seats on one of the more than 13,000 public school boards in America today. Look specifically at the curriculum development and textbook selection committees. We find that the same forces seeking control in the U.S. Supreme Court, the Centers for Disease Control, the Department of Education, the media outlets that oversee and regulate them, such as the FCC, are all actively involved in the intensive and all-pervasive work of recategorizing this nation as one that was founded by Christians, for Christians, with Christian documents and Christian ideals at the exclusion of all others. There is no desire for religious freedom at all, but instead utter totalitarianism. Once that has been firmly entrenched in the minds of enough Americans at the right levels of wealth and power, then the next phase of domination can take place. But don't take my word for it. Within the world of dominionism that Professor Carey mentioned earlier, there are some especially overt theorists and practitioners. Few more transparent than George Grant, who in his book, if you're taking notes, write it down, The Changing of the Guard, wrote openly about the foundational tenets and the long-term ultimate goals of his movement. I will read it verbatim, and I will read it at length, so you understand exactly what it is, what we're dealing with. If Jesus Christ is indeed Lord, as the Bible says, and if our commission is to bring the land into subjection to his lordship, as the Bible says, then all our activities, all our witnessing, all our preaching, all our craftsmanship, all our stewardship, and all our political action will aim at nothing short of that sacred purpose. Thus, Christian politics has as its primary interest the conquest of the land, the conquest of men, of families, institutions, bureaucracies, courts, governments, all for the kingdom of Christ. It is to reinstitute the authority of God's word as supreme over all judgments, over all legislation, over all declarations, over all constitutions and confederations. Fortunately, because of the theocratic orientation of our founding fathers, our nation has virtually all the apparatus extant to implement such a reclamation. Unfortunately, the enemies of the gospel have hand in hand eroded the strength of those godly foundations. Christians have an obligation, a mandate, a commission, a holy responsibility to reclaim the land for Jesus Christ, to have dominion in the civil structures just as in every other aspect of life and godliness. But it is dominion we are after, not just a voice. It is dominion we are after, not just influence. It is dominion we are after, not just equal time. It is dominion we are after. World conquest. That is what Christ has commissioned us to accomplish, and we must never settle for anything less. He literally wrote world conquest. And later in tonight's presentation, we will discuss the role of religious nationalism in other countries. But for the moment, let's keep it local. What do these ideas I've mentioned look like when they're being implemented right here around you? People you know, people you care about, and perhaps even yourself.
I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to tell you anything yet. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. If you've been reading the local paper, we have wonderful local journalism in this area. What I'm going to remind you of are news stories you've seen but maybe not pieced together that tell a narrative of a movement that is, as we've described, organized for dominion. So, what does it look like in our own county over the past few years? You may remember the 2022 gubernatorial election where Doug Mastriano was running as a transparent Christian nationalist. And right before, as the election time was coming, around the country, there were a series of what were called Reawaken America tours. All kinds of religious, political, and hucksterous wildness, people selling potions and prosperity gospels, yes, but also keen politics. November the 3rd, right before the election, the last Great Awakening tour event happened here in Lancaster County. This is Roger Stone, mentor to Donald Trump, who was here for it. That was the emphasis around the country of all the places to pick to exercise influence in central Pennsylvania. I first ran into Dominionist Christianity in a way that scared me in Lancaster in 2011 or 12. One of my best friends from home invited me to come to this conference, Voice of the Apostles, at the Marriott. I had no idea 5,000 Christians had come to Lancaster for this, but they had. I thought, well, I teach less than a mile away at the only theological seminary in town. How do I not know? Because few of us know about this movement. But I heard an apostle from California, Che An, who had a microphone outside the Capitol on January the 5th, 2021. 10 years before that, he talked about Christians taking dominion over the 7 mountains of culture. They're coming back to Lancaster October 29th to November the 1st. The Independence Law Center, based in Harrisburg, provides counsel to school boards that want to pursue Christian nationalist agendas. 5 of the 16 public school districts in Lancaster County have hired the Independence Law Center to help them draft policies to restrict the activities and belonging of trans kids or families that have trans parents. 5 out of 16. That may be outdated by now. If you look at a map of Moms for Liberty chapters, Moms for Liberty started in the Sarasota, Tampa area of Florida, so it's especially dense in central Florida. The number 2 location of density for Moms for Liberty activity, central Pennsylvania, southeast Pennsylvania. Book challenges, nasty letters to school teachers, purging books from, all the trans activity, parental rights, wanting vouchers for private schools to take public school money away and send them to these indoctrination schools is what they are. We are one of the most dense areas for that kind of activity. You may remember in this building, a film crew came from France to study this phenomenon of all places in Lancaster County. Veritas Academy, deeply plugged into that radical reformed movement from Moscow, Idaho. The same movement, Pete Hegseth says, he moved to Tennessee so his kids could go to one of those schools, who also has shared on social media voices calling for women not being able to vote. Recently, Messiah College was in the news, hosting for, I think, the 50th straight year, a movement of Messianic Jews, which to many Christians sounds, right? We hear, oh, it's a Christian school, it's a Christian movement. Must be nice. But it turns out that Messianic Jews have a strong affinity with the Christian nationalist independent charismatic movement and often show up at many of the same rallies and conferences and so forth. The most prominent leader in that movement in Grantham, Pennsylvania, said that people who support abortion rights are part of America's cult of Baal, famous pagan deity from our Old Testament Hebrew Bible. Said that the reason society has become more accepting of LGBT people is because of demonic influence from the god Ishtar, right? This is not nice Christianity. This is something else. Dayspring Christian Academy has an annual fundraiser. They hold it at the Marriott. They invite national conservative figures. There's Mike Huckabee. There's Pete Hegseth, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for a Christian school. The message every year is Remember America with a Christian nationalist theme. They had Sean Foyt in 2024. He is a Christian traveling musician. He conducted a rally outside the Capitol in Harrisburg before the election last year. All three of our democracy reporters were there to cover it. And Sean Foyt travels with armed security, some of whom are Oath Keepers, some of whom are from Elizabethtown sometimes. And says, you know, if you can come, you will meet Jesus at one of our rallies. Whether you come and encounter Jesus or try to start trouble, you will meet Jesus. And our paper has been tracking for several years a man named Charles Bousman. I introduce him to you because you may have been here long enough to have gotten the Lancaster Patriot as a newspaper, like on paper. But the organization morphed and developed into an online organization, also had a podcast. Charles Bousman, it turns out, helped find it. He also had his publications copied in Russia. And there's a question of funding for these organizations. The newspaper that we remember folded when the editor turned out to be a vocal white nationalist, but survived in a different way. You may remember the news story a few years about a gathering for a new white nationalist political party on this guy's property. You may remember that after the 2021 election and the January 6th insurrection, he moved to Moscow, not Idaho. And a news story lately that he is or will be returning to Lancaster soon. Finally, the newspaper broke this story, and to me it's everything. At Lancaster Bible College, there was an address for an organization called the Eden Bridge Foundation. Tens of millions of dollars had gone into this foundation housed at the Bible College. I could say more, but as the newspaper reports it, much of that money was then directed to right-wing political causes, especially concerning education, right? Because public education is a direct target, just like higher education is, of Christian nationalists. Tens of millions of dollars, the reporters said. And what I want you to imagine is, this is just Lancaster County. All over the country, there are ways for you to give your money, and if you're wealthy, a lot of money, to some really stinky causes, and no one can trace it to you because you gave it to the foundation, who then dispersed it for you. What I'm calling attention to with these news stories, just a brief, survey of stuff we've all seen, is that they are related rather than episodic. They're part of a movement that has think tanks and funders who fund in the billions of dollars every year, and volunteers and organizers and churches that are dedicated to communicating this message, sending the money, and organizing and activating. So what we're experiencing locally is part of that larger national context, and, as Professor Ward will share, a more than national context.
It was in 1988, following the conclusion of Pat Robertson's failed presidential bid, that William Safire wrote an op-ed in the New York Times entitled "The Demise of the Fundies." In this op-ed, he said that basically the end of evangelical political power has just been witnessed. Not only is Pat Robertson's career dead, but no one else will fill that vacuum. We are now moving into a completely bright, shiny future without having to worry about the fundamentalists anymore, whom he derisively referred to as the fundies. I think we can all know that he was wrong. That was 1988, and here we are now talking about this. And it really kind of brings to mind the idea that you can't blame him for, from his perspective, wanting that to be the case. This has been the hallmark of educated coastal elites and sophisticates from Hollywood to Harvard, at least for the last century, including perhaps starting at the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, where H.L. Mencken wrote for the Baltimore Sun, referring to people who refuse to believe in evolution as the great unwashed masses, the knuckle-dragging bourgeoisie, the gaping yahoos of the countryside. And while in the Scopes monkey trial, it's important to remember, actually the creationists won, but in the court of public opinion, they were destroyed. And people just excoriated them nationwide, and indeed even internationally. The desire to dismiss what we are seeing. Maybe it's just one strange thing happening in Lancaster County. Maybe it's just one wingnut in Oklahoma. Maybe it's just one small group participating oddly in New Mexico, or what I see every day in Louisiana. The desire to dismiss them as unorganized or even incapable of getting organized is incredibly dangerous. And unfortunately, my colleagues and loved ones on the left have done that for far too long. And indeed, people who identify themselves as in the center and those center-right have done the same thing as well, dismissing it for generations. And that's how we got to where we are at this moment. Now, many of you will have heard of some of these operationalizing organizations up here on the slide. First, is probably top of many people's minds, the Heritage Foundation, founded in the early 70s. That is the think tank that brought us Project Blitz, which you may have heard of previously, but then more recently, the notorious Project 2025. Then you've also got the Family Research Council, which is the lobbying arm of James Dobson's Focus on the Family. And they are actively working against things like LGBTQIA plus rights and protections. They constantly say, divorce should never be an option. They're trying to promote things like male headship and women's submission, etc., even corporeal punishment. James Dobson got his start as a child psychologist, inviting people to stop letting their kids become sissies and bring back ways of smacking them around to make them proper children. Indeed, breaking the child was a core tenet of his beliefs. My children that are in the front row are not here right now. All right. It's probably all for the better. And they work directly with, perhaps you've heard of this organization as well, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. What they do is they draft legislation to be disseminated to all 50 state houses, whether it's Baton Rouge, Harrisburg, and the other 48. And what they do is they allow some of those bits of legislation to trickle down, not just within the state houses, but to the county level. I guess, here you have townships, and in my state we have parishes, and then down to the municipal level as well. And then you've got the Alliance Defending Freedom, which expands Christian religious practices very intentionally within public schools and the public halls of government, allowing for things like trying to convert people in the workplace when you work for the federal government. That's where we are now, with the ADF defending all attempts to do so, saying that it's a matter of a right of free speech. And then you've got this one. I'm just curious, quick show of hands, how many of you have heard of the Council for National Policy? This is exactly how they like it. The Council for National Policy is a shadowy organization that meets thrice yearly, bringing together high-ranking conservative politicians with the richest people in America, if not the world, and then also with dominionist leaders. They get together, they talk about what policy should look like for the rest of the country and indeed planet Earth. And in 2018, there was a membership list that was leaked to the public. It is a who's who of the most powerful movers and shakers that walk this planet. So consider then the ecosystem of strategic implementation. The richest Americans consult with faith and power brokers so that all three may increase or at least maintain their level of influence. Many on the council are actually founders, funders, and employees of the other organizations that you see on that slide. And the idea is that we constantly want to think that they're independent, that they're not talking to each other. Well, you'd be wrong. Because just look at some of these usual suspects that I put up here on this slide. Let's start with Paul Weyrich, bottom right. Paul Weyrich over there founded the Heritage Foundation. He established the Free Congress Foundation. He established the American Legislative Exchange Council. He was the one who coined the term the moral majority. And Jerry Falwell was like, I like that. I'm going to take that to the next level. And he founded the CNP with the guy right above him, picture-wise, Pastor Tim LaHaye. Pastor Tim LaHaye, you may know, when he wasn't busy founding the CNP, also wrote the Left Behind series, a blockbuster series of books about the end times, the rapture, and it became a a billion-dollar industry with movies and TV and books and all kinds of fan art and fan fiction. I think they're even going to have a musical soon, The Apocalypse on Ice. I think that's probably all, an inevitable coming on. And then you've got these other characters. They're far left. That's James Dobson over there. And then you've got Jerry Falwell. And they don't just stay in politics and the church. They expand. They diversify. They have media empires. Look at Pat Robertson and the 700 Club, right? And then, all of them call each other. I put underneath each of them all the organizations to which they belonged and they founded. This is an incredibly incestuous ecosystem with funding and ideas filtering around into each other. And consider indeed how it works. Because when, let's say, some of the richest people in America get together and they say, we really need X, Y, and Z to protect our investments. And then they talk to the politicians and they say, can we get a theological defense for what we're about to do to the economy? And they say, no problem. Dominion theology has all sorts of things that you can now use. That immediately becomes sermons, which are disseminated to thousands of churches across America. Then those people in the pews who hear those sermons go to their elected representatives who are already sitting there on the phone with ALEC, getting that state legislature that's getting that legislation written in order to put in the hopper, whether it's in Minnesota or in Maine. And then if somebody, like present company perhaps, rises up and says, this is against the Constitution, this is against the Founding Fathers, we can't possibly have that. Don't worry, the Alliance Defending Freedom is right there. Already had guessed all of your arguments, already is fully funded, already is there to wave the banner of freedom and justice. And consider how much money they've got to do it. The Heritage Foundation alone operates on over $100 million annually. That's how much money they get in, and they spend every penny of it. So does the ADF. Focus on the Family and the Family Research Council, over $120 million. The Council for National Policy is an entity unto itself. The members have amassed a personal wealth that rivals the gross national product of whole countries. Think about what you can do with that amount of money. Think about how many pastors you can buy off. Think about how much legislation you can draft, how many politicians you can pick up, how many political action committees you can fund, etc., etc. So the other thing to consider on this previous slide, as was mentioned by Professor Carey earlier, these guys have nothing in common theologically. I'm looking at a Greek Melkite, I'm looking at a Southern Baptist, an Independent Baptist, Assemblies of God, and a Bible. No, maybe there's a Bible involved, but there's mostly signs and wonders and a lot of speaking in tongues and laying of hands. These people, if it was in Puritan times, would be lynching and whipping each other. But instead, they have somehow managed to find common cause, put aside their theological differences, and come forth for the thing that they actually worship more than anything, namely power. And as they put their initiatives forward through those multiple ways, which are again inextricably tied to one another, then you start saying, and if you really want to get out there, put on your tinfoil hat, get all those little strings of red yarn and start connecting it everywhere like you saw on the previous slide, and start seeing that this is indeed part and parcel of a global trend, the global trend towards authoritarianism. And it is here that we recognize this tripartite alliance between dominion theology, elected positions and appointed positions of power, and immeasurable wealth. They fund organizations like the World Congress of Families, which perhaps you've never heard of. They draw people and groups together for conferences on the traditional family all over the world, featuring male headship, women's submission, again, corporal punishment, zero tolerance for divorce and LGBTQ issues. And the conferences feature thousands of conservatives from a dizzying array of Christian denominations, in addition to Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, who are all there finding common cause for restoration. That ceaseless desire to reclaim a distant, mythical past when everything was simpler, better, and pure, when men were men and women listened to them and children knew it was better to be seen than heard. The cosmic order was in perfect alignment and must be reestablished, they say. In Uganda, where I spent much of my time between 2013 and 2020, I saw it with my own eyes. Here, dominionists, mostly led by the International House of Prayer, yes, IHOP, from Kansas City, swooped into, look it up, they swooped into Uganda, and the first thing they did was they started, building schools for people. And isn't that nice? We love it when people build schools. We have an education deficit. It's nice of you to build schools. But the question is, what are you teaching in those schools, Kansas City people? And then they start taking over radio stations and television stations. And then they're starting to create their own seminaries in their own peculiar version of dominionist theology. Then they start lobbying on the floor of Parliament in Kampala, Uganda. And after years of pushing forward their agenda, they got what they wanted in 2023 with the anti-homosexuality laws, which render aggravated homosexuality as a capital crime punishable by death. The World Bank and other institutions immediately came out and said, this is ridiculous, you can't do that, we're going to withhold your money. So the central government of Uganda has not executed anyone for being gay yet. But every single Sunday after church, full-color newspapers are distributed to the populace free of charge with the names, pictures, and home addresses of homosexuals and their allies. A rash of beatings, killings, disappearances, and public humiliations continues to rock the nation. Across the world, in Brazil, end times dominionists have teamed up with the narco militias, recruiting from prisons and gangs in order to build massive organizations that are as well armed as they are well funded. In order to get elected now to Congress in Brazil, you need to start currying favor with them, what they are referred to as the neo-charismatic narco militias. It's a mouthful. And so at this moment, the Evangelical Popular Front, that's the caucus for people who curry favor with this set of people, has already taken 30 Senate seats and 182 deputies in the lower chamber. That's the data from today. Recent studies indicate worldwide about 35,000 people convert to neo-charismatic faiths every day. Whoop. Every day. Every day. There we go. Most of them are, in fact, in Brazil and Nigeria. What we find in India, where I spent a significant portion of my life, that's where Narendra Modi, remember this is not an exclusively Christian phenomenon we're talking about here tonight when it comes to religious nationalism. Prime Minister Modi has said that it is time to reinstate Hindutva, Hindu nationalism, where only real Indians are Hindu Indians and everybody else has got to go. That includes Muslims. Now, the latest textbooks out of the Central Ministry of Education, approved by Narendra Modi, have no mention of the Mughal Empire at all. These are Muslim conquerors who owned India for 3 centuries and built the Taj Mahal. But they're not there. Why? Because they're inconvenient. He wants to paint a picture of what India should be based upon a glorious Hindu past that needs to be reclaimed. Sound familiar? Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has ushered in a new era of Islamic nationalism that had previously been suppressed for over a century. To the south, Benjamin Netanyahu has formed a coalition government with far-right extremists who vehemently insist that the astonishing carnage in Gaza right now is part of God's divine plan, a providential plan for Jewish people to lay claim to all the land from the Nile to the Euphrates. There's a few other countries in there that might have a thing to say about that. In Hungary, where both Professor Carey and I have spent some time, Viktor Orban espouses his own term. It's called illiberal Christian democracy, which features staunch opposition to multiculturalism, freedom of the press, immigration, and anything outside of a very James Dobsonian perception of the traditional family. He is immensely popular with Christian conservatives, Christian nationalists especially the ones that run CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. In Dallas in 2022, Viktor Orban was their keynote speaker. And earlier this year, they chose Hungary as their first European conference. The CPAC said that's where we're going to start. That's where we're going to plant our flag, because Hungary is, to quote the website of CPAC, a bastion of conservative resistance. So you see, this is not a movement of isolated individuals across Lancaster or across the country. It's not even limited to our own shores. It is enormous, it is mobilized, it is resourced, it is disciplined, with allies that often seem incredibly unlikely. This can seem overwhelming and daunting. But fear not and be of cheerful heart, my friends, for there is a great deal that can be done to engage with these forces and defang their most pernicious aspects. But let us begin with the personal and spiritual component. For that, I return this to you, sir.
So the first time I did a talk on Christian nationalism, I got one criticism, and it was, "You scared us. That's all you did." And so I began adding, what can we do? And what does a Christian response look like? Some of what I'm going to say is based on theology, and some is based on psychology. But the first thing that Christians would want to do is stay very close, this is for Christians, to the doings and sayings of Jesus. The reason I say that is I've paid a lot of attention to Christian nationalists preaching and writing and public discourse. You know what you won't hear? Blessed are the peacemakers. Love your enemy. Prodigal son. Good Samaritan. Rich man and Lazarus. Persistent widow. On and on and on. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the lowly. What you hear is dominion, 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 miracles and miracles, more dominion. Christians need to stay close to Jesus in order to shape our imaginations, shape our worldview, shape how we act and how we speak. A second thing I ask you to do, regardless of religious outlook, is to guard your soul and build community, which are closely related. And what I mean by guard your soul is I can't tell you how many people I know who are losing sleep, who are short of temper, who are anxious, fearful, maybe having panic symptoms. I've described myself, and I've never had panic symptoms before in my life. Just a general sense of not being well. Look how good it is to see each other in this room. And when I'm asked to go on the road and talk about, I say, don't invite me to your church. Get 10 churches, just so everybody can see each other in the same room, right? But move beyond seeing each other in the same room to build community. If you're a person who worships and prays, if you love music and the arts, if you have a pet or grandchildren or children or kids you love, if you have friends, if you love nature, whatever it is that feeds your soul, feed your soul so that you can be pliable and kind and resilient, because you will never win an argument. You might think you have all these zingers that work great on social media. But when was the last time you said to someone, you're having one of those back and forths, I hope it's not Thanksgiving, and you say something so smart, the other person says, oh my goodness, I've been wrong this whole time? Learn, I don't think this is a practice among the brethren, but I should have asked. It is in my Christian roots, it is in the black church, it is among Pentecostals to learn to testify. And in church, what that means is you tell the story of God's goodness to you. But what I want to invite you to do, and I mean it seriously, go home, get a blank sheet of paper, get a pencil, and think about what are the values dearest to your heart, and start scribbling, and learn to speak from your heart. Don't argue. Don't try to win. Listen even, but to your heart. I want every kid to have access to the same quality of education my grandson has. I want to live in a society where we imagine each other as people we can do great things together. I don't want somebody else's preacher praying on behalf of my grandson or teaching him how. By the way, neither do they. I want everyone in the society, regardless of whatever their story is, to at least be acknowledged as a child of God with dignity. I don't want to live in a society where people go bankrupt because they had bad luck with a medical accident. Just learn to testify from your heart, not to argue. And every once in a while, the best thing that can happen is you're talking with someone and they don't say, man, I've been wrong. Maybe they get to that place, I've been there. Man, I'm not sure what I think about what I've just been saying. And then finally, you heard Dr. Ward. There is no way to build a democratic society that honors the rights of every person if we don't organize. I do some of that work with Power Interfaith. I have other ways of doing it. It could be knocking on doors. It could be giving money. It could be calling, writing letters, writing postcards. It could be a bunch of stuff, but don't do it alone. Organize. Organize, organize, organize. And that's why I begin by staying, for Christians, stay close to the way of Jesus and guard your soul, because all that organizing is going to need good, positive energy from deep in ourselves. So just remember, friends, that Jesus told his disciples not to lord over other people and exercise dominion over other people. That's what the Gentiles do. That Jesus is the Lamb of God, not the lion who roars and devours.
Folks, with regards to the questions and answers, Dr. Ward's going to give the last section here, but this would be the time if you had a question, fill the card out. I think Joan's telling everybody Joan's walking around to collect them. She's walking around the outside. She'll also walk through the middle. So if you'll get those questions to her, that would be great. Thank you so much.
What can a concerned citizen do to educate themselves further and take appropriate action? I'm reminded, Louisiana is the most Catholic state in the country, and right next to Tulane University, literally right next to it is Loyola, and Loyola is, of course, run by the Jesuits, and I'm a good friend with a bunch of the Jesuit fathers, and what they always say is, we're all just souls in search of God. But my secular brethren and sisterin like to say instead, we are all just citizens in search of a community. And that sense, that concept of community, I think might be our way out of this mess. I believe that ability to create an inviting place, recognizing the suffering of others, is probably where we should begin. We need to out-Christian the Christian nationalists at the very beginning. You see, the thing is, tonight, we told you an awful lot about the nature of this movement, where it came from, how they move, how they operationalize, what resources they have, what their long-term goals are. That's the leadership. And it doesn't matter at all if they don't have a great mass of people who are willing to fill their ranks, believe them, listen to what they have to say. Earlier this evening, I told you we're all storytelling creatures. Well, the Christian nationalists have some really good stories. Stories that the world is black and white. There are good guys and bad guys. And if you're not with us, you're a bad guy. And we're going to not just give you earthly riches, we're going to give you eternal salvation. Stick with us. We're going to give you power right here and right now. Stick with us. And let's face it, America is a troubled place right now. People are scared. They're grappling with very serious economic uncertainty, social instability, the rising cost of living, and diminishing prospects. A huge section of society feels increasingly maligned and left behind, culturally, intellectually, and politically, not to mention financially. These are legitimate grievances experienced by decent human beings, and they must be acknowledged. If you wish to know more, people have written specifically about this phenomenon. Sociologist Arlie Hochschild, in her book Strangers in Their Own Land, and Chris Hedges, American Fascists, wrote about this extensively. We must work together to fix economic injustice and offer new hope. The Christian nationalist threat will never be blunted as long as there are social and economic inequalities plaguing our nation to the degree that they currently are, and this includes adequate wages, job security, and significant state assistance to provide a future for tens of millions of Americans. We need to break down those systems of indoctrination that I showed you before, from pre-KK schools all the way through graduate school, where one message of power worship is being espoused. And the paperbacks and the TV channels, the media empires, and who knows, probably a new cryptocurrency soon enough. We need to enable and empower people to identify and confront these false narratives and that lead followers into a worldview of magical thinking rather than rational thought. That's what Thomas Jefferson would have really wanted. In Finland recently, a government program has every single fourth grader trilingual. Every single fourth grader in Finland speaks English and Finnish fluently. Then they choose another language in second grade to be perfect at in fourth grade. And once you've mastered that, then, this is public education, by the way, then what the Finns do is they say, we need to make sure that you can parse out fake news. And so they have fourth graders reading 3 different news stories in 3 different languages and starting to triangulate, something doesn't smell right here. Can you imagine if we had that in the public schools in the US? That's something to pray for. I mean, we also need to counter the power of the billionaire backers. The Christian nationalist movement is financially supported by the billionaire class who profit from a system that discourages social safety nets and wealth redistribution. We need to organize, and I'm going to use my words very carefully here, organize, just as Dr. Carey said over here, a rival militancy. And I do not mean a violent militancy. not doing violence, but more than definitely ready to receive it. Because if we are organized and we are protesting and we are striking, then we will bring upon us the full wrath of the powers that be with increasing brutality. And then, most of all, this is the kicker, the most meaningful, the most difficult, and some of you will find the least satisfying. Offer genuine compassion and community. Instead of condemnation offered by Christian nationalist leaders, small acts of human kindness offered can be deeply subversive to totalitarian creeds. If liberals were to actively engage in showing kindness to those outside their group, abandon the tired tropes of condescension, snide derision, and intellectual snobbery, they can help affirm our shared humanity and offer a genuine alternative to the exclusionary nature of this extremist movement. Yes, I am actually saying that we should start calling them in, not shutting them out. And one of the ways I sum up everything I say at the end of my Christian nationalist course at Tulane, when people say, well, what do we do? I say, hug a Christian nationalist. It's not going to work unless we do, y'all. If we talk about a place for everyone, we got to hear that crazy uncle at Thanksgiving too. And just like Dr. Carey says, we can't just expect that our witty argument is going to convince them. They're going to be whiz-zapped, have a moment of revelation and suddenly agree with us. That's not going to happen. But if we can, kill them with kindness over time, we might just get to be where we need to be, saving us all before it's too late. And on a larger level, there are a number of organizations that are doing excellent work, in addition to not just the sanctuary we are now, the Church of the Brethren, and Power Interfaith, but Christians Against Christian Nationalism, which was established just a few short years ago. But all the way back in the 30s, that's when you got the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Then right after World War II, you got Americans United for the separation of church and state. You've got the Freedom From Religion Foundation. It's not just freedom of religion, but freedom from as well. Perhaps one of these names even appeals to you. Maybe you want to exercise your Christian faith as you battle the existential threat of Christian nationalism. There is a place for you in this initiative, in this collective fight. Perhaps you know someone who is currently enrolled, high school or college or graduate school. Get them hooked up with the Secular Student Alliance. And by making ourselves aware of what the movement is, what its goals are, how it works, we collectively take the first step in preserving, protecting, and defending our republic from corruption and collapse. One of my staunchest atheist students one day came up to me and said, Professor Ward, people who work for those organizations, people who support them, they're guardians of democracy. And on that note, which I trust you will find a hopeful one, a clear and compassionate one, I urge you to go forth into the world and take your own place at this critical juncture, and that we will all testify together when the shadows of theocracy lengthened, free people armed with conscience and courage rose up to defend the light of liberty. You are not alone. We will be right there with you. Thank you.
Entertaining? Informative? Yes. We're in Elizabethtown, so the first question will be local. And trying to remain nonpartisan on this issue is hard. So here we go. What do you think, and what would you do about public school board members trying to make Christianity and the Bible a requirement in the public schools? Think in Oklahoma. Especially school board members saying that there isn't any reason why a student wouldn't be allowed to opt out of being influenced by Christianity and the Bible. Dr. Carey, if you'll start us out.
Sure. So I think I'm on. Yeah. The first thing is, again, that's using a democratic means. They win elections to get to the point to do this. And then they say there's freedom of speech and religion's important. But notice what they're doing If a kid asks not to be a part of that, they've just volunteered to be marginalized and called attention to. So there's a coercion, right, when religion is taught in public schools. The other question is, how's it going to be taught? Because there are genuine professional biblical scholars helping public schools learn how to teach biblical studies in a way that's not sectarian, but that's not what we're wanting to do. But how do you respond to that, right? One simple fact is, once they have that power, they're going to do it. You can file a lawsuit. It can take 5 years, but there's going to be harm. And so that's back to the organizing and voting, which I want to say, some of the best of that is happening here in E-Town. We have an alum who's just a tiger. I'm scared of her. But that was, I thought, funny, but it's also... Anyway, the other thing is, when elections are close, a lot of elections in Lancaster County are not close, right? But when there's a chance and voters know, they will vote against Christian nationalist candidates when they know what their agenda really is. And we've seen it.
Dr. Ward, I think this one has your name on it. It's been 16 days, and here we go. What impact has Turning Point USA had on the growth of Christian nationalism in young people?
Never underestimate the power of martyrdom. And what Charlie Kirk has become is a transcendent figure where anything he really did on earth is rapidly going to be forgotten. History is going to be rewritten, especially not just for the people in college now, but the ones yet to come. That there was this young person who did amazing things, even, if they're exaggerations or outright falsifications, into the future, and you should emulate him. And dying for the cause is a noble thing. What I can tell you that I've seen on campus already in multiple universities in New Orleans, which I never expected to see at places like Tulane and Loyola, shrines. People actually putting up shrines on campus with candles and pictures. What effect does it have? This is the beginning of the worship of martyrs, false though they may be.
Where do you see the Catholic Church in all of this, and particularly Pope Leo, given that the tenets of Christian nationalism are an anathema to the Catholic social teaching?
The present Pope and the last Pope both have said things that are critical of religious domination. And since Vatican II, the theology of the Roman Catholic Church is explicitly not dominionist. But quite a few of the Catholic bishops in the United States are dominionist. And so Catholicism, like every other flavor of religion, is complicated.
How do we make people more aware of all the deep connections of Christian nationalism and their desire to control and eradicate our democracy?
I think we're doing it right now. This is what Power Interfaith is doing. This is what every conversation I imagine we're going to collectively have with everyone else who will listen to us going forward. This movement started over 50 years ago. It's going to take a long time to dismantle. And they worked very intentionally in the shadows. They didn't want the limelight. So it's going to take an awful lot of effort. But I think we don't just steal a page from the Christian nationalist playbook. I think we take the whole playbook and we do exactly what they did and start mimicking a lot of the information dissemination that they've been so successful at doing.
A relevant question for 2025. Can you comment on the use of AI by this movement? Are they using this?
All I can say very briefly is that right-wing Christianity has always been ahead on technology.
Yes.
Right on the cutting edge. That's all I know to say at the moment.
You can do it. You can go down the rabbit hole right now and watch all these AI-generated videos about Bible stories, which are total fabrications. I mean, you can see Jesus with a machine gun riding a triceratops into battle and getting rid of all the baddies, right? And this can be disseminated. A lie makes its way around the world, before the truth puts its pants on in the morning. And that's what we're currently witnessing.
How do we manage desires to allow differences of belief, opinion, expressions of faith, with boldly and gently, in love and truth, calling out evil?
What authoritarians have discovered is that democracy is fragile precisely because it values freedom. And so they will use arguments about their own freedom to get platforms and leverage it and feet in the door, right? And so what we have to do is insist that we live in a society where, yes, you can say these things, and if they're not true, we'll point it out. We'll be happy to do that. But you can say these things, but we are not going to live in a society where you can tell us what we can't do or say. You can't take away our freedom. And the language of freedom in dominionist Christianity literally just means freedom for their kind of Christians to do what they want to do. So think about COVID. I'll be quick. Think about COVID. I don't have to wear a mask regardless of the risk to everybody else. Right? I don't have a right to be free from the risk that you're causing.
How do we make people more aware of all the deep connections of Christian nationalism and their desire to control and eradicate our democracy?
I will say, you can give people books. Good luck. There are some great documentaries that are easy to get access to. One is Bad Faith. Mm-hmm. One Professor Ward shared with me, Apocalypse in the Tropics, or Apocalypse of the Tropics, which shows it working in Brazil. And when you watch it in Brazil, you'll gasp, because it's just what we've seen here, including trying to take over the Capitol. So I recommend that form of education. Podcast, if people are podcasty. And I do, if you want to email me, I keep a bibliography of stuff. But, yeah.
Another one would be God Loves Uganda, about the International House of Prayer in Uganda.
I think we've kind of touched on this, but maybe a little nuanced here. How can we open the eyes of, quote, innocent, unquote, Christian nationalists, meaning people who wouldn't call themselves one, but believe it?
Mm-hmm. That's great, and that goes back to an earlier slide you showed where people don't even know that they are acting within the trenches as members of the rank and file from the PRRI, right?
Right.
You want to keep going with that?
Well, so if you think about your ordinary active Christian nationalist who votes and may volunteer and so forth, they're getting their messaging from somewhere else that's nationally coordinated and all that. And it does no good to have that argument. There's none, because that's the environment in which they live. What the psychologists recommend, as I understand it, is to say, tell me more about how that came to be important to you. When did you start believing that? Mm-hmm. What's at stake in that? Would that apply to everyone? And you're not arguing, you're listening. But it at least begins the process of asking someone to reflect on why they're committed the ways they are.
One of the most extraordinary interchanges I've ever seen in my life, I'll be quick, was between a member and a devotee of the Seven Mountain Mandate prophecy, which you briefly mentioned, a subset and a radical component of Dominion theology, debating on stage someone about the biblical nature of flat earth theory. The other person was a flat earther, but they were both Seven Mountain Mandaters. And one was saying, no, the Bible clearly says the world is round, and the other one says, no, the Bible clearly says it's flat. This went on for an hour and a half. Neither of them convinced the other, but it goes to show that, precisely the methodology Professor Carey suggested is superior.
The Trump administration has said they will not enforce the Johnson Amendment, which prohibits churches from advocating for specific candidates or parties while keeping their nonprofit status. How bad is this?
Go for it.
Well, it's really bad, right? But churches have been organized and having their ways of doing this work around the Johnson Amendment, sometimes in the face of the Johnson Amendment for a long time. What I would want to emphasize more is don't become the pro-democracy counterpart of that. One of the major reasons people are leaving congregations is because they perceive them to be politicized. Now, faith has a political dimension. But in countries where there's a national church, where the government sponsors the church and pays for its buildings and pays for its clergy and all that, you know what? Nobody goes to church. Like, you're talking percentages like 9%, 13%. People don't want to be part of a religious community that's seeking secular power over. And so don't become that. Become witnesses for not that.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I said it's a little difficult to be nonpartisan, so here we go. Is Trump simply a stooge of the Christian national movement?
My answer is no. No. You agree? Okay. We have millions of people who are highly motivated, and he looked around and he said, who can I say what they want? And you've got, even within the staunch Christian nationalist world, the ones who are actually thinking theologically, and they are the minority, they have to do mental gymnastics, the likes of which would blow your mind, to somehow say why Trump is their candidate. You got people like Lance Wallnau who say, oh, he's like Cyrus. He's like the Persian king. He wasn't Jewish, but he did great things for the Jews by letting them leave Persia and return to the Holy Land. So Trump is our Cyrus candidate, and therefore we should support him. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Don't pay attention to anything else that's going on. You're looking at quite literally an unholy alliance of opportunism. He gives them what they want, and they vote for him. Not a stooge at all.
I would agree, and I would even say, no one knows what Donald Trump thinks, but
not even Donald Trump.
If I had to bet, I would bet that he deeply values his own flavor of Christianity. And I could take a while explaining why I believe that.
When we engage in conversation with far right and suggest they aren't getting accurate truth, they can say the same to those across the aisle, that they aren't getting the truth. It does create a problem with truth that many just turn away from any trust. How do you discern truth?
So, first thing I would say is, it's amazing the conversations I have with right-wing Christians who will say, oh, it's just a matter of opinion, isn't it? And then say, but I'm absolutely right in a different conversation, right? In other words, the other thing I will say is, in that movement, and I'm a former evangelical and have pastored evangelical churches. One time I asked a congregation, how many of you were lied to in church? And almost every hand went up. Because disinformation, I'm sorry to say it, is part of the movement.
Yep.
And it has been since the founding. Just a fact. So how do we discern truth? Well, we're not scientists, right? We're not sociologists. We can't do, you and I, or well, there are some social scientists in the room. But we tend to discern truth based on the opinion of the majority of people who have the skills to learn something or document it. And we are living in a society where that kind of access to truth is being completely undermined. So I have changed my giving this year. I give less to church and more to local media and national media that are committed to reporting.
And you can always move to Finland.
When do Christian nationalists become interested in politics, and why?
Oh, I mean, the cradle.
Well, do you mean as individuals or do you mean the movement?
I think the question refers to individuals.
What do you think? I think that's the water they're raised in.
If you grow up in that church.
Yeah.
But what I will say is all of us tend to adopt the attitudes of the people we're closest to and the people we admire. Right?
Sure.
When I've changed my mind, I can tell you who influenced me. And almost always it's somebody I looked up to or felt close to. So religion and politics are social. These things happen in context. And yes, people are nurtured in it, whether they grow up in it or move into it. And I would just say, if you're a pastor, for example, resisting it, and you get to see them 1 or 2 hours a week, they're on their phone 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
What is PragerU? What is the impact of PragerU? How do they work? Funding and the priority to homeschooling.
How many of you have heard of PragerU?
Good start.
All right. For those of you who haven't, it really started making the rounds less than 5 years ago, I would say, with a bunch of short videos where people who look, professorial would sit there and tell you, did you know slavery actually wasn't that bad? Did you know that actually immigrants cause more crime than da-da-da-da-da-da? And then they throw around all kinds of fancy statistics and there'd be footnotes at the bottom of the screen. And PragerU sounds like, oh, Kentucky U, and it's a university, and these people have suits, they must be professors, and they're saying things that, by golly, I like. And that's how they kept getting more and more attention and reposts and likes. But this is a private set of ideologues who have gotten well connected with all of the organizations that you saw on preceding slides before. They get a lot of funding, like many other internet sensations, through the advertising that goes along with them, but people donate tremendously. They have lately gotten an actual curriculum that is mostly for homeschool, but charter schools and parochial schools as well, where, just like I spent the first part of my presentation talking about rewriting history, this is getting them while they're young. This is telling you, like, hey man, slavery, I mean, can you imagine how much better off you are as a slave than if we left you back in Senegambia? That's almost a direct quote from one of their videos, right? And then talking about, Columbus didn't kill anybody. He was a man of his times. You want to make an omelet, you got to kill some people. And that's sort of the attitude that goes into it. And it's growing more because more and more people are literally buying into using that fabricated curriculum to raise their children.
Well, politicians are appointing it.
Yes.
I just want to add, every authoritarian movement goes after science, public education, higher education,
Yes.
Goes after any kind of institutional norming of knowledge, right? Media and journalism, way up top. And as Dr. Ward said, they've studied Hungary intensively, and in Hungary, they've all but shut down a free press, shut down free institutions, all of that. By the way, it's not a coincidence that Hungary is now the poorest country in the EU, because they've shut down all the spaces for civic life.
And you would think that would create a popular outcry, but they're prepared for it because they say, you know why you're poor? It's the immigrants.
Same.
What is another name beside Christian nationalist that these groups can be called? It's a statement. It's difficult to convince a Christian to dislike a Christian. It's difficult to convince a patriot to be against nationalism, at least as a lay understanding goes.
At first, Christian nationalists, when the term became popular, scholars have been using it for decades, okay? But when the term first became popular, would deny being Christian nationalists. They'd say they just make that up to make fun of us.
Yep.
And now, to your point, Scott, they're owning it. They're owning the term often. Christian nationalist isn't a perfect term. There are other terms you could use. Christian supremacist would do really well, actually. But Christian nationalist has become so common, I still use it. But I recently published a column about debunking false assumptions about Christian nationalism, and one was that it's nationalist.
Christopher Hedges, whom I mentioned in my presentation, refers to them as Christo-fascists. That way you don't get to call them Christian, and you don't call them nationalists or patriots.
I think the next question you all did address, but let's do it one more time. Would you say that power is really the end game for Christian nationalists?
I think their end game is ideally the ones who believe everything, aren't cynical, for everyone to live a particular kind of lifestyle that they think is the ideal lifestyle. But the only way to accomplish that, because their ideas are so unpopular, is to exercise power over other people.
Well said. I couldn't add anything to that.
Is there any Christ in Christian nationalism?
That's you.
Yes. Okay, yes. Who is Christ for them? They will often be quick to say, Jesus died for my sins. They will often be quick to say, Jesus gave us authority over all the nations, right? Jesus will function in domesticated ways and as sort of an identity marker, a brand, or a label. If you read Kristen Comas de May's Jesus and John Wayne, in the movement, sometimes you'll see Jesus, as Professor Ward indicated, super buff with weapons. And that is a Jesus of Christian nationalism. But there is Jesus in it. And their preachers will spout Bible verses so fast you'll get dizzy.
This one's for you.
Thank goodness.
If you mention to Christian nationalists that the First Amendment to the Constitution refutes all beliefs that a Christian nationalist or otherwise can control the United States government, what would the Christian nationalists say?
I'm burning in hell. I hate America. That is an argument that is an appeal to logic and reality. And those are things that are not part and parcel with this movement. You don't seem satisfied with that answer.
And billions of dollars are being spent on the lie that Professor Ward talked about earlier. Rewriting American history, turning the founders into very conservative Christians, which wasn't even a category then of what you would be. There's the Wall Builders Foundation, headed by a guy named David Barton. His work is so bad, his Christian publisher pulled it off the shelves when evangelical historians pointed it out.
Right.
And the Museum of the Bible. The whole purpose of the Museum of the Bible is to tell the story of America as a Bible-shaped nation. So they have all these reasons that they believe it. That's what they're hearing in church.
The Museum of the Bible is a particularly interesting one. That's in D.C., and it was opened and run by the Green family, who owns Hobby Lobby, who were the people who had the court case go all up. They shouldn't have to pay for birth control in their health insurance plan for any of their people. The Museum of the Bible is, yet again, not one entity that is independent from the others. It is inextricably tied to that toxic brew of militant political conservatism, dominionist theology, and free market capitalism.
Lancaster County board member.
Ooh.
I don't know if they're still on it.
Our program.
Thank you.
I started with some thank yous, and I'm going to end with some thank yous. How many of you have ever served on a committee?
Oh, wow.
Everybody. Amazing. And on those committees, did you find that a few people did a lot of work? And the others kind of like, floated along. So, Joan Kester and Pat Gerlach, where are you? They're coming down the aisle. Dearly beloved. Thank you for all the work that you two did. A note here is that all of you gave up your data on that email address, and Eventbrite's going to use it to find out and give you an evaluation of what you thought of this program tonight. In closing, we do live in a great country. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to exercise our rights to free speech and to practice our faith as we see fit. It's been 234 years since the First Amendment was ratified. It's 2025, we're still fighting for those rights. But there's a guy out there that said, it's a good fight we should get into. Travel safely, be well, peace be with you, Pax Nobiscum.
Pax Vobiscum. Fantastic. We should do this more.